Now, for any person that's ever had an alcoholic in their family, there's always a tipping point in the relationship. Something happens, some watershed event that happens that makes it change forever. It's never the same as it was before this particular event. And I've talked about this before, and in her memoir, Amanda, A Cautionary Tale of Alcoholism, I mean, I go over this. I spent an entire chapter going over what I'm about to go over, and this is probably going to be a series of 3 or 4 different videos. But it happened when my mother passed away back in 2015, and it was a long, drawn-out event. Unfortunately, she had had a series of strokes. My father called me up and said, it's time to come home, and we flew to New York. I live in California, and it was a nightmare from the beginning with my wife, and I still to this day do not understand why she was acting the way she was. A lot of stress, obviously, but it was a very sad event. And unfortunately, the nightmare really began before we even got to the airport to fly to New York, because I mean, I had to pack all the bags, all her bags. She had been drinking heavily. I don't know if it was the stress of having to go see my family, because they obviously weren't going to tolerate her drinking, and she was going to be in a situation where she wasn't going to have control over her drinking. There was going to be too many eyes at my dad's house, and I think that stressed her out. So she was fairly inebriated before we even left for the flight. And I mean, I had to pack both bags. We finally got in the car. She was putting up a big fight, as I remember, that she wasn't going to get into the car until I had bought her like a bottle of wine. And that had happened earlier that morning. And it's stressful enough to have to get to the airport in time, and then we had to go buy her a bottle of wine on the way home. I mean, I had to completely placate her. I had no other options, and she was playing on that, and that was extremely disturbing. That we had to buy her alcohol to induce her to fly. It was unbelievable. And at this point, my son and I were both very irritated. I mean, we haven't even started the trip yet, and we were both pissed off. She was supposed to have found a place to park the car, because, I mean, this was a good 10 years ago. Uber really wasn't that big yet, so we drove down there. I ended up parking a car. My son had to find a parking place on his, I think he had his laptop in the back, sitting in the back seat, and he actually found a spot because my wife was too inebriated to even do it, and she tried it for like an hour, and she just wasn't functioning. She was pretty inebriated. So we found a spot. It wasn't ideal. Then we had to take a shuttle to the airport, and I mean, just getting her out of the car and to walk into the airport was just an absolute ordeal. We had to wait for her. She just had to keep sitting down. She was inebriated, and it was embarrassing just to get on to the flight to go see my parents, because my mother was dying. There was not a moment, not a minute of peace. And again, the reason why I tell this story, it has nothing to do about disparaging my wife or alcoholics in general. It's about what families have to endure in every situation. As delicate as this situation was, and as stressful as it was for me, because I was losing my mother, all of my energy had to go into dealing with my alcoholic wife. And it was an unbelievable event. And this was just the beginning. This was going to be a month-long process. And this was just the beginning. We finally got, past security. I mean, that was an ordeal in itself. I mean, they were looking at her like, is she okay? And I go, yeah, she's just not feeling very well, that kind of thing. We always had to BS just to get your way through. And it was a long walk, and she had trouble with her knees. I think she had crutches at this point. And it was very, very hard. Very, very hard. We finally got to the place where we were supposed to go, and of course, she had to stop at a bar on the way just to get there. And we only had a few minutes to get there, but she had to get a drink before we got there. She had her own money. I wasn't even going to deal with that. It was just all about getting her on the plane, and we finally got her on the plane. I remember just the feeling of relief when we finally sat in our seats, and it was just, I was already so stressed out, and we hadn't even started this trip. And then, of course, going to Syracuse, New York from San Diego, you fly to, I think we flew to Chicago or Atlanta, but I think this time it was Chicago. And then you got to get out, and there's like maybe a 2-hour layover. Of course, in Chicago O'Hare, there's a million bars, there's a million restaurants, and it's like, oh, we have to grab some lunch. And my son and I are just kind of looking at each other like, I guess because we knew it was just going to end up with nothing about the food and always about the alcohol, and it's absorbent in prices. And there was just no happy moment. It just was not a happy moment. It was a stressed out time. And eventually we got back on the plane, and of course she's ordering drinks on the plane. I'm like, Amanda, we're going to be landing in New York. My family's picking me up, and you are going to be hammered. Okay, this is not a good situation to start this journey. And this isn't like a vacation. Okay, my mother's dying. Okay, you need to be sober. You need to sober up. And it was this huge back and forth argument, that I was stressing her out because I'm keep bringing, her drinking up, the usual conversations that you have with a loved one who's suffering from this. And the whole purpose of this conversation is that there is no respite for the family. No matter what the situation, the holiday, the event, whatever, it's irrelevant when you have an alcoholic in your family, because the alcohol is the only thing that counts, that matters to them. And it becomes a very self-centered, very narcissistic type of thing, even though she was not a narcissist at all. It just brings out the disease, and the disease is almost impossible to deal with when you're in certain situations. So after about 7.5, 8 hours of flying between layovers, we finally landed in New York, and that was the beginning of the month-long hassle. But again, the stories and others are in Amanda, A Cautionary Tale of Alcoholism. Again, it's the story of my wife's 20-year decline with alcohol use disorder, and unfortunately she passed away from the disease almost 5 years ago. And again, I go live Monday through Friday right around 6 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and we're back because TikTok's back. And again, we have the Facebook group. It's called There's an Alcoholic in the Family. It's in the link tree. Also, when you're ready to work with me one-on-one, set up a breakthrough call, also in my link tree. And I'm looking for people who want to change their lives in the lives of their family. And again, thanks so much for listening.